Millions of lives have been sadly destroyed and forcefully cut short because of the desire of governments to control their populations. Under funding from the World Bank, USAID, and other governmental agencies in Europe and North America, governments in third world countries were forced to sterilize or castrate their populations under so-called birth control in exchange for aid. Just as aid is being used to bully these same countries to accept comprehensive sexuality education and legalize same-sex marriage in pursuit of the LGBTQ+ agenda. There is nothing new under the sun. Under the influence of Paul Ehrlich's book, The Population Bomb, and with funding from the US, World Bank, and other Western donor agencies, many third world countries were forced to forcefully sterilize or castrate their populations in order to get funding and aid. More on this later under LGBTQ+ coercion. Governments around the world instituted measures to forcefully sterilize women and men in their countries to keep them from giving birth. In most cases, these were done secretly. The worst form of mass forced sterilization of both men and women occurs in India and Bangladesh, where health workers are given daily and monthly quotas, that is, a minimum number of people to sterilize or castrate. Failure to meet this minimum number of daily or monthly sterilizations is punishable. Health workers who fail to meet the minimum number of sterilizations are laid off. This situation forces these workers to force and deceptively sterilize poorer women and men without their knowledge. In 1978, the Bangladeshi government aimed to sterilize or castrate 50,000 people per month. The number of people who have been forcefully, deceptively, and secretly castrated or sterilized runs into the millions. Many innocent people were thus made unable to give birth. In some cases, governments gave monetary inducements in exchange for sterilization, as in Singapore. Others were forcefully caught and sterilized. In Bangladesh, the government gives 2,000 Bangladeshi taka, or about $24, to women who are persuaded to undergo tubal ligation and to men who are persuaded to undergo vasectomy. Women are also offered a sari and men are offered a kurta to wear for undergoing sterilization. The referrer, who persuades the woman or man to undergo sterilization, gets 300 Bangladeshi taka, or about $3.60. A 50% rise in the amount paid to men coincided with a doubling of the number of vasectomies between 1980 and 1981. Indeed, poor people were most vulnerable to this system, as they were more inclined to receive the money and undergo sterilization. Innocent women who attend hospitals for other ailments are also secretly sterilized without their knowledge or consent. This is done by the health workers to help them achieve the minimum quota given to them by the government. Health workers were given monthly quotas in Bangladesh, India, and China, where people were forcefully castrated or sterilized to reduce their birth rate and control their populations. In some cases, women with pregnancies were forced to undergo abortions and subsequently sterilized to keep them from ever getting pregnant again. Since 1951, and especially during the time of Prime Minister Indira Gandhi, India has been forcefully sterilizing millions of her citizens, either secretly or openly with government support. According to the United Nations, India alone is accountable for 37% of the world's female sterilization in 2011. Funded by American philanthropists and institutions such as the Ford and Rockefeller Foundations, and influenced by the dangerous theories from the population bomb, millions of Indian men were forcefully sterilized through vasectomies. When the resistance became too much, it was switched to women and young girls. Encouraged by loans amounting to tens of millions of dollars from the World Bank, the Swedish International Development Authority, and the United Nations Population Fund, India embarked on an ambitious population control program. Prime Minister Indira Gandhi, with the support of her son Sanjay Gandhi, instituted the emergency in which government officials surrounded villages and forcefully castrated as many men as they could lay hands on. Indira Priyadarshini Gandhi was an Indian politician and stateswoman who served as the third Prime Minister of India from 1966 to 1977, and again from 1980 until her assassination in 1984. She was India's first and, to date, only female prime minister. She instituted the emergency under which the constitution was suspended and millions of men were forcefully caught and castrated. Millions of men lost their manhood and virility as a result of this cruelty. Many men in India at that time had to run away from their homes, sleep on farms, and even avoid taking trains just to avoid being caught and castrated. There was no discrepancy between those with kids and those without kids. Any male who was caught was immediately castrated during this period. An astonishing 6.2 million Indian men were sterilized in just a year, which was, well, 15 times the number of people sterilized by the Nazis, according to science journalist Mara Hvistendal. 2,000 men died from botched operations. India carried out nearly 4 million sterilizations during 2013 to 2014, according to official figures. Less than 100,000 of these surgeries were done on men. More than 700 deaths were reported due to botched surgeries between 2009 and 2012. There were 356 reported cases of complications arising out of the surgeries. These innocent women are all being kept in sterilization camps where they will be forcefully sterilized in India. These sterilization camps are still present in India even as I speak. This man is among more than the 6 million men who were forcefully caught from their villages in India and forcefully castrated or sterilized so that they can't give birth again. Even as I write, these forced sterilizations are still ongoing in India, albeit on a smaller scale than what occurred during the time of Indira Gandhi. Many poor women and other ethnic minorities are herded into sterilization camps where they are sterilized. The Indian Supreme Court recently ruled in 2022 against these forced sterilizations and ordered the government to stop and remove these camps within 3 years. This little girl has been forcibly sterilized to keep her from giving birth forever. She is being carried away in great pain from the sterilization camp. So heartbreaking. Nearly 4 million Indians, mostly women, were sterilized during 2013 to 14. In this picture, this lady has been sterilized through tubal ligation. She can't give birth again. This program normally targets the poor. Under China's one-child policy, which was enforced from the 1970s until 2016, millions of children were killed through abortion, starvation, and neglect by terrified parents. Parents who already had at least one child were also forcefully sterilized or even castrated to prevent them from having any more children. Some women who became pregnant were caught and forced to undergo abortions, and then sterilized to prevent future pregnancies. It was honestly a time of fear and terror in China, as millions felt compelled to dispose of their additional children just to avoid being discovered by the government. Many baby girls were abandoned, while male children were kept alive, and this has now led to a shortage of females in China. Nowadays, China has lifted the one-child policy. Families are now allowed to have up to 3 children, but the country is struggling to convince its population to even consider giving birth, as birth rates rapidly decline and the population ages quickly. In fact, the government has now started a campaign to encourage people to have more children. There was a woman who was pregnant but was forced to have an abortion in China to remove her baby. She is now suing the government for forcibly sterilizing her. Millions of people in China are honestly caught and sterilized against their will, or if they are pregnant, forced to have abortions. This especially happens among minority ethnic groups that the government is seeking to repress and oppress. Yet there are numerous reports accusing China of forcing thousands of women in Xinjiang province, particularly among the Uyghurs, into concentration camps for forced sterilization and castration. Such government-backed policies have also, unfortunately, been implemented in many countries with funding from the US government, the World Bank, and other international donor agencies. For example, in Puerto Rico, the poverty of the country was linked to what was described as the very fertile nature of Puerto Rican women. As a result, an aggressive campaign was launched to sterilize as many women as possible. By 1965, about 34% of women of childbearing age had been sterilized in Puerto Rico, and two-thirds of them were still in their early 20s. At one point, the levels of sterilization in Puerto Rico were so high that they alarmed the Joint Committee for Hospital Accreditation, which then demanded that Puerto Rican hospitals limit sterilizations to 10% of all hospital deliveries in order to receive accreditation. The high popularity of sterilization continued into the 60s and 70s, during which the Puerto Rican government made these procedures available for free or at reduced fees. So, this woman in Xinjiang, China, is an Uyghur woman. Uyghurs are Muslims living in northeastern China. The government is forcefully sterilizing and castrating millions of women and men to reduce their populations. China's forced sterilization of Uyghur and other Turkic women in East Turkestan is an act of genocide, according to the East Turkestan government in exile. The BBC recently reported on a mass campaign by the Danish government against Inuit women in Greenland, spanning from the 1920s to the 1970s. Thousands of these indigenous Red Indians had birth control coils, or IUDs, inserted into them without their knowledge or consent. It's estimated that about half of all the women in Greenland had these implants placed in them. Some of them were as young as 13 years old. The Danish government, working together with physicians in Greenland, implemented this policy so that whenever any woman visited the hospital, the physicians would insert the implants into them. Many of these women struggled for years to have children, but without success. The Danish government has recently apologized for these evils and announced plans to investigate these atrocities and compensate the victims. In Greenland, doctors secretly inserted IUD coils into women and young girls to control the population of the Red Indian or Inuit population in Greenland. After this campaign was launched, the population and birth rate of these innocent Indians or Inuit dropped to about half of their initial population. A similar program was also instituted in Peru between 1990 and 2000 to drastically reduce the population of the indigenous non-European tribes and poor people. This mass sterilization against a particular tribe has been described as a genocide and was shamefully funded by the USAID with $36 million, the Nippon Foundation, and later the United Nations Population Fund, or UNFPA. In February 1996, the World Health Organization itself congratulated Peru's president, Alberto Fujimori, on his success in controlling demographic growth. The thousands of men and women who were forcefully sterilized or castrated during this period are still fighting the government for compensation in court. Suzanne says she was forced to have an abortion. Inuit Indians like Suzanne were forcefully sterilized against their will by the Danish government because they were Inuit Indians. Thousands of these innocent women were secretly sterilized or made to abort their babies even when they were pregnant. In Singapore, people were paid enticing sums of money in exchange for them to be sterilized or castrated. Uneducated women were especially targeted. Other countries that instituted government-backed forced sterilizations include Czechoslovakia and the Czech Republic. Against Romani women since the 1970s, Colombia, where sterilization rates among women remain more than 30% and are cheaper than other forms of birth control. Sweden, between 1934 and 1976, forcefully sterilized people with disabilities, racial minorities, uneducated people, promiscuous people, and so on. And Uzbekistan, as of 2012, thousands of women with more than 2 or 3 kids were being forcefully and secretly sterilized to reduce the country's population. There are also reports of HIV-positive women in Mexico, Kenya and South Africa who are being forced, induced or secretly sterilized under the excuse that they will transmit the disease to their offspring. Meanwhile, there are medications to prevent such mother-child transmissions. Bongakile Masibi was among 48 women sterilized without consent at state hospitals, the Commission for Gender Equality found. This woman in South Africa was sterilized without her consent after she gave birth at the age of 17 and only learned about it 11 years later when she tried to have another child. Recently, the Canadian government rendered an apology for the genocide against the Red Indians in Canada, who were forcefully taken away from their parents into boarding houses to keep them away from their parents forever. Thousands of such young kids died and were buried in those boarding schools. Although the government has come out to apologize, the effect of the genocidal actions against these marginalized Indians remains today. These government-backed policies and laws to regulate the population growth around the world are being repeated today under the guise of enforcing human rights through the LGBTQ+ agenda. It is so heartbreaking to find out that you have been sterilized against your consent or will, especially when you are ready to have a child. This is the unfortunate experience of millions of women around the world. Forced sterilizations are still ongoing in many parts of the world.